What are some ridiculous history facts? The election of Volodymyr Zelensky as president of Ukraine. People talk about how crazy it is that a reality TV star got elected president of the US, but I think this story is even crazier. Zelensky was the star of a political satire show called Servant of the People, where he played the president of Ukraine. The show's last episode aired on March 28, 2019. 3 days later, Zelensky carried 30% of the popular vote in the first round of elections, almost double the number carried by the incumbent President Petro Poroshenko in second. 3 weeks later, in round 2 of the election, Zelensky won with 73% of the popular vote. This is like West Wing star Martin Sheen defeating George Bush to become president in 2004. Just seems like the type of thing that'll be turned into a great documentary in 50 years. During the Cold War, there was an idea to drop XL condoms labeled medium onto the Soviets to make them think we were anatomically superior and be more afraid of fighting us. Easily my favorite part of American history. Whoops, I dropped my monster condom for my magnum dong. Ancient Greek and Roman marble statues were actually originally painted and were colorful. A lot of the statues' paint faded away and went away over time. Some people cleaned off the paint thinking it was debris or dirt. And other people just plain cleaned and removed all of the paint off of them because they preferred the look of white marble. Rome was actually a very colorful city, and it wasn't all made of just boring plain white marble. In 1908, there was a car race around the world that started in NYC. The route would start in NYC to San Francisco to Valdez, Alaska, across the Bering Strait, through Russia and Europe, with the finish line in Paris. Cars were relatively new and road infrastructure was limited to only metropolitan areas, and even then, a lot of it was cobbled stone. But what you might have thought, is how in the world can a car get across the Pacific? Duh, they would drive across the Bering Strait during the winter when it froze into an ice bridge. Silly. The race began in February 1908 and immediately ran into challenges. To list a few: cars breaking down multiple times, lack of usable roads, car-hating people giving wrong directions, and oh yeah, snow. The first team reached San Francisco in 41 days. But quickly realized that the proposed route from San Francisco to Alaska did not exist. So the organizers allowed teams to ship their cars to Valdez, Alaska, then continue on the ice bridge. Once in Valdez, the teams found out that there is in fact no ice bridge across the Bering Strait anymore because it melted 20,000 years ago. Small oversight. Organizers then allowed teams to ship their cars across the Pacific to Japan, then Russia to carry on. Despite all unpredictable and hilariously predictable odds, the winning team arrived in Paris 169 days later. Highly recommend to listen about it from the Dollop podcast. There's more nonsense that happens that I couldn't fit in/remember. The capture of the Dutch fleet at Den Helder on the night of the 23rd of January 1795 presents a rare occurrence of a naval battle between warships and cavalry, in which a French Revolutionary Hussar regiment captured a Dutch Republican fleet frozen at anchor between the 3 kilometers (1.9 miles) stretch of sea that separates the mainland port of Den Helder and the island of Texel. After a charge across the frozen Zuiderzee, the French cavalry captured 14 Dutch ships and 850 guns. A capture of ships by horsemen is an extremely rare feat in military history. The Cadaver Synod, aka the time a pope dug up another pope's corpse, put it on trial, found it guilty, had it reburied, dug it up again, and chucked it into the river. So, Pope Stephen VI really hated the guy that was pope before the guy that was pope before him, aka Pope Formosus. I believe their relationship would be called Pope Twice Removed. That line will work on 2 levels in just a second. Anyways, so Stephen V super hated him. It was pretty much all because of powerful families and politics and grudges. Still, Pope is a literally lifelong gig. And that means the guy he hated had been dead for a bit by the time Stephen V became Pope, 7 months. So what did Stephen V do? Why he dug up the Burma dead previous pontiff and put his remains on trial, of course. He was found guilty, stripped of his garments, had 3 fingers removed, they were his blessing fingers, was redressed in peasant garb, and reburied in a pauper's grave. This didn't feel like enough for old Stevie Vi, so he dug him up again and had him chucked into the Tiber River. Stephen Vi was then imprisoned for the whole thing and later strangled. Stalin used to take people on the side to have some drinks with them or invite them to join him for a vacation in his holiday home. Khrushchev wrote about how much he hated those drinking breaks and vacations. Of course Stalin would try to get you drunk and get info from you, and could decide he wants to kill you during the vacation, but you can't really decline his invitation. Khrushchev would also try to subtly get Stalin drunk as well and get info from him. One time during a vacation with Stalin, Stalin asked him to dance a Ukrainian folk dance in front of a bunch of people. Khrushchev hated dancing, but he had to do it. The Massachusetts colony banned celebrating Christmas. During that time period many people used it as an excuse to get hammered and party. Another tradition was that the young adults would cross-dress then go door-to-door singing songs and demanding food. This clearly doesn't fit with Puritan lifestyle, so the governor banned public celebrations. People could still celebrate it in their homes if they didn't get too rowdy. I think it was unbanned when Massachusetts became a state, but didn't become mainstream until Christmas became a national holiday. Nashville briefly legalized prostitution during the Civil War. Union soldiers stationed there kept getting syphilis, so the no prostitutes were put on a large barge in the river. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened after that, but no, it didn't work very well. So it was legalized and prostitutes had to be registered or get a license, I can't remember which, and were required to have STD checks. This lowered the amount of prostitutes with syphilis because it was getting caught and treated. That lowered the amount of soldiers getting syphilis and made the army happy. It was outlawed shortly after the war ended though. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Mile Bucktoothed or Mile Tusk, as his front 2 teeth were abnormally large and buck-toothed. They decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktoothed had realized he had been betrayed but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men, but alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch: after the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktoothed pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France. Like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. So he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. 2 separate times that we know of, one single man has stopped the world from going into thermonuclear war. During the Cuban Missile Crisis and the American blockade of Russian ships to the island, a Russian submarine on patrol was found by the Americans and was under soft attack. Ships were dropping depth charges on them to try and get them to surface and communicate. Of the 3 officers on board, 2 wanted to fire a nuclear torpedo in retaliation. Vasily Arkhipov disagreed and was able to prevent the launch because it required unanimous agreement. They surfaced and didn't start World War III. The second man was working at an early warning station in the USSR, and they, falsely, detected a missile attack from America. Stanislav Petrov stalled the alarms and prevented a preemptive counterattack. 25 minutes later he got confirmation it was a glitch and had also prevented World War III. There have also been countless other accidents involving nuclear weapons throughout the decades, with many coming dangerously close to triggering an unintentional explosion. We're lucky, to say the least, to have avoided catastrophe so far. Former US President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a US president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired, but the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away, but not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the shit out of him with a cane. In the book, The Art of War, I read about a Chinese general whom, after defeating his enemies, invited them all over for dinner. They accepted but were cautious. At the dinner table, the other men were skeptical because they had thought that the general was going to poison them. This was far from the truth. The general actually retired his enemies by giving them a place to stay, riches, and women. They never betrayed him. Make friends with your enemies so that they don't betray you. We'll get more info later, but if anyone can do me the favor, that would be great. Edit: it was actually the 48 Laws of Power that I was reading, but I believe that the author, Robert Greene, took some inspiration from The Art of War. My mistake. Edit 2, wow, my very first silver award ever. Thank you, awesome stranger. Edit 3, here is a quick summary. In 959 AD, General Zhao Kuangyin became Emperor Sung, and it was probable that he would be murdered in a year or two. Desperate to break the cycle, he invited his fellow powerful generals to a banquet and dismissed the guards. The generals in the room were now very afraid that the king was planning on killing them all, here and now, in one fell swoop. To their surprise and relief, the king made them an offer: give up your commands and I will give you fine estates and beautiful dwellings where you can enjoy singers and girls as companions. The now relieved generals took him up on his offer, realizing that a life of riches and security preferable to a life of constant anxiety and struggle. Just like that, he made enemies into friends. One of my favorites is the story of Tommy Fitzpatrick. In 1956 he stole a small plane from New Jersey for a bet and then landed it perfectly on the narrow street in front of the bar he had been drinking at in Manhattan. 2 years later, he did it again after someone didn't believe he had done it the first time. What's also crazy is that the punishment for the first time ended up being only a $100 fine, since the charges were dropped by the owner of the plane, and the second resulted in only 6 months in jail. Here is an article about it. Henry Cavendish. The man who was vital in the discovery of gases and discovered hydrogen. He inherited a ton of money from his uncle, and built a special castle, I think. He was incredibly introverted, so it was designed so that he never had to meet or see any of his servants. He communicated with them through notes only. He did, however, appreciate other scientists coming to visit and talk. His works mostly came after his death, of course, but I found this guy interesting. Surprised it didn't get mentioned, but here goes: The Freakin' Siege of Tyre, by Alexander of Macedon. So, Alexander the Pretty Awesome was doing his thing, rampaging through the Persian Empire, because that's what you do. Anywho, he comes across the island city of Tyre, an impregnable island fortress who had been a wee bit too chummy with the Persians, for Alex the surprisingly vindictive. They had a powerful navy that kept hampering efforts at taking the siege to them, and Alex the more than adequate was getting peeved. Now, the whole issue was that impregnable island fortress required an attack by sea. So, Alexander the balls to the walls just decided to turn a shallow isthmus between the mainland and the island into a landmass, thus turning Tyre into a peninsula. Crazy shenanigans, involving cranes on boats, naval raids to impede on the progress of the Macedonian troops and engineers. In the end, Tyre fell. Alexander the impossibly persistent was rewarded with victory. TL, Dr. Alex the not too shabby sees an impregnable island fortress, turns it into not an island. When Julius Caesar was in his mid-20s, he was captured and held random ransom by pirates. Apparently he was insulted by the amount of random ransom they had asked for, not fully realizing who they had captured, and demanded they ask for more. Well, while people were off gathering the random ransom, Caesar basically told them while laughing and joking that after he was freed he was going to have them crucified, a particularly brutal execution, reserved for slaves and the like. They didn't believe him, so good old Caesar, not one to make empty threats, rounded them up and sent them off to execution via crucifixion. However, in the end, he showed mercy and had their throats slit, resulting in a much quicker, less painful and exponentially faster death.